I have one caveat to that I think exacerbated that statistic this year in particular. A couple years ago when I first came in, I worked with Peter Burke and Kevin on how we report our overall grant funding in terms of ensuring that it was listed as an expenditure. So the increase when we went to full-day kindergarten was associated with a significant increase in the number of open choice students we took at the time, which led again to a pretty significant increase in the overall grant funding. That grant is now being, when Burke does the financial report, the ED 001, placed in as an expenditure that's pulled into this per pupil cost for the first time. You're seeing it this year. So it's $1 million that was not there before.
That was my first question.
In the equation.
I thought you told me that was in 13-14. That's why it was.
Yeah, in 13-14.
13-14.
Right.
This is latest.
This is the audited year.
The audited year. And I was talking about
that number would be lower.
Yeah, I was talking about.
Right, I'm just talking about the relative position
Yep.
jumping up several,
Right.
Which is a bit of an outlier. We're up
Okay,
one, down
sure.
one. We
Yep.
went up
Like
3 or 4.
30 FTE, isn't it?
What's that?
The total FTE through grants is about 30, isn't it? Through grant
Overall
funded.
grant
Yeah,
funding
yes,
overall, I
yes.
believe
So,
it
well,
is.
yeah, on your page 8, yeah, we've got it just broken out. There is
Between the different grants, yeah.
There is 30 between all. But
30 between
in
all.
terms of the choice,
The grant I'm referring to is the specific
it's
attendance grant, which is about 900.
about 7
700.
FTE.
So that's going to be folded into all the towns now per pupil, not just Simsbury, but everybody, correct?
Yes,
Right.
yes. So it is truly this is the most
True all-in
So
cost.
that's true to us,
Apples
and
to
I think
apples metric.
in this current year.
So can I just build on exactly what Linda was saying? I know that this isn't the accurate math, and it's clearly not your audited accurate numbers, but if I just simply say how many students you have next year and how much your total budget is, it makes your cost per student going up. It went up last year $1,000 a student on your audited numbers, and again, that was part of this addition of full-day kindergarten. But on top of that, next year, it's going to go up more than 1,000 if you do the math, just big picture. And so I'm just concerned, if you look at the information you gave us in your letter, we've historically gone up, 500 a student year after year after year for the last 10 years. If 2 years in a row we're jumping up $1,000 a student, that's going to sooner or later put us up near Hartford. So, I mean, we're still on your list that she was just looking at down a bit, but if you look at the people that cost more than us, there's not much. I mean, Farmington's about the same. There aren't very many of those school systems we want to emulate that are in that higher cost per student. So I think if it's really 1,000, maybe that's a number you could share with us, doing the calculation correctly instead of my back of the envelope
That's using the
calculation.
247 increase?
Yeah, using using what you're asking for.
What
in
I
your
asked them to
spreadsheet.
do is, ED 01, every town can do things a little different.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always a true comparison. I said pure budget for pure students,
That's what I did.
and I had Burke do it because that's what I run. They're averaging about 4.25 over the last 5 years before this year. This year's 5.25
Percentage
surface.
increase.
The change you're talking about.
on the change, right, going up 16,237, but that's at the first budget. If you take this off and about what we're else to do, we're probably down, I see us down to the low 4.2, and now we're in a more acceptable range. 'Cause I
Except
always-
you're not putting the number of students into that calculation, are you?
Yeah, I got projected
That
students
is,
in
yeah,
there.
that is totally what the calculation is just simple math of budget
Yeah,
divided
simple
by
math.
number of students, whereas the net current expenditure calculation is different because it's taking not just your operating, but all those sources that we actually now show in gross on page 6. Right, page 6. And divides it by a particular formula of the state process.
So Peter, does that tell you, so here's what I'm concerned about. Go back to page 3.
The problem is, other towns have different numbers in this. This is not what their budget is.
Right.
This is not what our
I
budget
understand
is.
that.
This ED01 is an interesting report.
But I think there's still a point to be made that we need to think about sort of the sustainability of
Yes.
that trend compared to the trend in
Correct.
the grand list or, the revenue base.
I think you're right, but I think it has to be looked at over time. You can't look at it
Yes,
over year. over year.
absolutely, absolutely.
A variation of 300 students from one district to another is going to turn into a differential of about $1,000 per student.
Right.
So if Glastonbury or Farmington or whatever has a variation larger than ours or less than ours for a year or two, that's going to skew those numbers. Over time, because we're collectively seeing our enrollments decline, we should all sort of level out at some point. But year over year, I think it would be, we don't want to chase that metric. That would be really dangerous on a year-over-year basis. I think we should be looking at it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
but
that's
we're
where I
talking
was
over 4
heading,
years.
is to say, I think it's a really important metric for us to be staying
I
on
agree,
top
but
of.
I
And
think that, you know, if you take 4,500 students on 67 million, you come up with around 14.9. If you take 4,200 students on 67 million and change it, you come up with 15,900. So 300 student variation can, you know, which is within the realm of what we've seen in a couple of years, that can make a big difference, and
Right.
that's what's happened to us. We've been looking at that metric over the time.
But I would like to
look
look-
at it over a long period of time, not over a year or two.
and I'm not suggesting we look at it over a year or two, but I would like to see that metric displayed
Sure.
regularly in a,
Always
in,
is. It's in all your budget packages.
well,
Every
not,
year.
not quite the way I want to look at it, which is to look at the percentage increase year over year and compare us to other towns. And I'm
Sure, I don't
not seeing
disagree.
that.
I would, I'm troubled by that as a key metric, though, because it has nothing.
One
to do
of
with
many.
Educational outcome. Educational outcome is our ranking within the state, and I think that's a metric that at least we as a board have to be focused on.
Well, so we are too. We haven't been talking about cutting programs, or we've been talking about that extra stuff where we think there could be room in the budget. And Peter's been talking about things we can do actually outside your budget to help bring some money back that will help, flatten this a bit. So we're focused on quality education too. So I hope you're not getting that impression. We're just making sure that where there's an opportunity in any of the line items, especially that don't affect the education
Quality.
line directly, right, school quality, that we make sure we get the budget as tight as we can.
I was just say, I agree, Mike, and like
Yeah.
Glastonbury, for example, I think is fifth in one metric, we're sixth, and then there's another one, I think we're fifth, they're ninth, but they're 5.6 less per pupil cost, which multiplied out by the number of students is a huge number. And I'm just, again, not looking to cut programs or any of those things, but just looking really to tighten up our numbers and to be as accurate as we possibly can, and where we can take decreases, where we've gained efficiencies beyond the actuarial assumptions on the insurance, OPEB, and the like, I'd like to see that reflected in the budget. I think in fairness to current taxpayers and really to our students. And we need more families moving to town with kids. I know I've often heard people say, we don't want, more kids moving into town, but frankly, the declining enrollment in our community and fewer young people, it's not great. I mean, if you're, for example, seeing over 10 years a decline of 15% and spending's going up 31% over that same 10-year period, I guess I would rather see, it'd be great if we could enroll kids almost on a private school basis, since we have such great schools from some other towns, because what you're saying is if we go down 15%, that doesn't equate to a 15% reduction in staff because it's spread out among 12 grades, 5 different schools, or actually middle school, et cetera, 7 different schools. So, frankly, we get the most bang for our buck if the class size is, let's say 26 is optimal at a certain grade year, or 23. If we have 23 rather than, maybe 3 classes at 18 in that given year. And we probably don't have the opportunity, do we, to bring in kids on a private school basis. I see people sending their kids.
It's been limited, but we, from time to time, and we charge them the per pupil expenditures, the number that we
We have a handful of kids that do that, and parents that do that.
It's not a bad idea if you look at some of the, towns that don't have anywhere near the academic outcomes that we have in those years where, we're looking like we're going to have 4 per less, than the ideal across the whole grade, and you've got 12 kids you can take in, multiply 12 times $16,000, and there's, a couple $100,000 off your budget.
Okay. A couple other questions. First of all, Moira wasn't here. She gave me a list of questions. You covered the one about student activities. She asked the broad, general question about closing the school. I know it's a difficult choice. Could you just refresh us where we are on that, if that's in the equation or when it's in the equation?
So the past couple of years, we've been engaged in this work of the Facilities and Enrollment Task Force. This year, we really took a hard look. We went through an exercise that's actually in your packets, the background information of what it would look like to empty out each of the 5 elementary schools and try to redistrict it into the other schools. The options there have been limited by the fact that we have the plans to remove the modular space, so we're a little bit better right-sized than we were a few years ago with all that modular space on there. So the outcome there was that the only school that even mathematically would work at this point was Terrafil, where the renovation, quite honestly, the conversation did not really even get off the ground at that point because the renovation project was not even closed. It would be a significant payback burden up front to the state of Connecticut for the reimbursable dollars. And that's before even getting into the whole uniqueness of where Terrafil sits geographically in the town and everything else. So we continue to say we will look at that because the enrollment is fluid. We can't take that off the table, but in terms of a conversation over the course of the next 3 years, we moved it out because we used enrollment information into the next several years to look at that. So it's something we're taking a hard look at and we'll continue to.
This is a question of mine, capital non-reoccurring. I didn't see that tab, you handed it out. Did everyone get a copy of that?
Yeah.
I did, I just handed it out. It shows two things. It shows the 5-year payback schedule, and it shows the general categories of our spending that would be typically in the public hearing type notice.
Yeah, so the $570,500, what you propose to spend?
Yep. There's ceiling and flooring for $75,000, plumbing and electrical, $31,000, interior improvements, $87,500, exterior, $38,000, and then under the equipment category, which includes vehicles also, $339,000.
How many buses? My predecessor will want me to ask this question.
3 buses.
Who won it?
Paul wants me to ask this question.
Paul wants to hear the number
He wants to hear the number of buses.
We're looking at 2 buses at this point because I'm thinking that we need to purchase, looking at 2, but I'm thinking we need to switch more to focusing on the vans because that's where the growth of our transportation issues are, to give ourselves more flexibility.
But basically on transportation equipment, you're tending to spend, at least the range we wanted to have spent every year.
Yeah, yep, for sure.
Yeah, so this is for us to look at, and this will be in the hearing. We have to move this forward too, when we move everything forward. So we approve your operating, we approve the capital non-recurring, and then the capital budget is over with the Board of Selectmen, and they haven't moved it forward to us yet, so we have not seen that. Okay.
So Pete, if we have that new program, and I'm sorry I missed the last meeting, so you may have talked about this then, but the new program where if they have efficiency programs, we're going to put a separate fund where they can pay it back over time. Would they also need to present that in time for the budget?
Yeah, well, but there's a new twist to that, and we'll talk about it tonight, is if we want to set up that fund, we have to talk about the payback and talk about a lot of issues, or we can just, we're going to take the money out of the current year's budget we're in, transfer it into there. Or we can just say, let's pay for this and not have a payback.
Which may work this time, but the idea was setting up a program.
Right, setting up a
where
program,
it
but
was
this
a
would work, because
continuing-
this is a larger payback at $150,000 on 370. That, to me, seems like an obvious choice. We'd want to do that.
But we want to give them the incentive
Right.
to find projects like this and bring them forth and
Right.
execute on them.
Yeah, so I think we have to, we need the Board of Selectmen to initiate that. We have to give them clear signals what we want. If we want to pay cash for the 370 for this project, put it in the current year we're in, we can do that. Because we have range up to 900,000. So I would like to, and if he can save $150 or $150,000 or possibly more, if he really looked at the numbers. Because there's various, how you look at that, consultants give you reports, and it's not, they obviously aim high, so the consultant might have a higher number than you're using here, but, you got to be realistic. It's not always what they think, because things change, too. What you got 6 months ago and what it is today are 2 different numbers, too. So I think if Bert gives us a reasonable assessment, and what that is, and if he feels it's 100.5, then fine, that's what it is. But I think we spend 370 for 100.5, that's worth doing. I don't think we're wasting
Oh,
taxpayers'
yeah,
money doing
nobody's
that.
suggesting that. It's just if we're gonna set up a new fund like we talked about, they probably have to have that in time for the budget.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we have to have we have to have the money approved, or we can either put it in the fund or directly just pay for it as a direct transfer. So next meeting, which is the 17th, that's when that decision has to be made.
Yep.
So that will be,
The agreement on the non-lapsing too?
the agreement on the non-lapsing, we have to perfect the non-lapsing. We had questions there whether it's 1 year, I think we've resolved that. We have a solution to limit it to 1% total. So it kind of doesn't say, it doesn't mean you can build that fund forever, so it kind of limits them to 650,000 in that fund by the 1%. So I think we have to decide that, set that up for them so they can take advantage of this potential savings in this year's budget. What we have to talk about tonight is authorization. We have a 7.5% investment policy for our OPEB. I want us to ratify that, so if I go back to the actuary, I say use the 7.5, and that will get us more savings than we showed up there. In total, it's about 115,000. She gave us a number. I'm not sure what their share is, but everyone gets savings, the town and that. And basically it decreases our liability by 1.1 million. Then the payback, the past service costs goes down about 115,000. So that's a favorable. And then also we have to talk about the excess money in that self-insurance fund, what we consider are good reserves to have in there, and there's no real guidelines. I mean, Mr. Lindbergh gave us his in October. I pulled those out. It was 27% of your cost on the medical, 8% on the dental. I did the math there. It comes to, let's say, $3 million, if you do that math. So anything over $3 million is excess. We had $6.5 million, so that's $3.5 million. So that's a decent excess. So I think we can feel comfortable saying we're going to take X dollars, let's say 300,000, and give both boards some budget relief out of that, pro rata, whatever it is. So I think that's something else we have to decide next week, for sure what we want it to be, because we have to go to the voters on April 8th with the number. So I want these expenditures to be known. All the expenditures have to be factored in. If it's a revenue item, different animal. Also, we have to talk about our debt service. We're trying to get our hands on debt service because Joe's figuring out how much we're going to bond, and we're about to go to bond. And he did a projection with about $6.1 million of bonding, trying to maximize as much as we can to take advantage of the low rates. In addition, we're going to do a refinancing, and that's going to save us some money. So that could save us the refinancing about $175,000.
It runs the gamut.
Yeah.
It's a little down under that now.
I bet it's down under because rates are moving, but we can probably budget a lower debt service number. We're going to talk about that, what we want to do. So we're going to talk about that next week and say, here's a number we feel comfortable with. Because there's still some moving, and we're not going to have bonded by the April 8th. We're not going to bond till middle of April.
Yeah, April 17th.
April 17th, I think we go to actual bond. So we're moving, we got to get the rating agencies in here, and we're moving forward, but it's going to take time. So rates are changing, but we got some potential savings there, too.
So Peter, those decisions will be made prior to our next board meeting, which is the 24th,
Yes.
at which time we could firm up and take a look at these numbers. We'd have an idea of the harder numbers and have a conversation and a
We'll have
reconsideration of that number.
Yeah, we'll have a new actuaries report for the OPEB.
Right.
I told her to hold off. There's something else we can do to change that actuary number. This is something I floated at the last meeting. This fund balance we have over in the self-insurance fund can be transferred to the OPEB. Okay? And you say, why do that? Well, what you do is by transferring a piece of it to OPEB, it loses our liabilities. You get a 7% return or 7.5% return on it, and it lowers
Your contribution.
the contribution. So there's, we can look at all that, and
And that gives you a longer-term benefit.
that gives us a longer-term benefit. It's not just a one-shot deal. We can give a longer-term benefit. So it's worth looking at, and that's why long-range planning should look at something like that. We can do a short-term plan now to, say, transfer 300, and then long-term, think about doing that. Also, if we talked to the actuary really nice, there's an interest factor that can go away if we fund something before the end of the year. So we have to talk really nice to her, and she might remove 90,000 from the calculation, but I wasn't able to get there today on the phone yet. But there's just a lot of opportunities.
You're talking about shifting something from July 1st to June
Yeah,
30th and
there-
picking up a...
No, it's a little longer of a period.
Yeah, there's longer, but there-
Theoretically, that's what he's talking about.
64 days.
so there's a lot, so we have to, I'm going to make some hard decisions with the actuary by after the 17th, so we can get hard numbers to everyone to work on, and it's only, we can get better. So we're going to try to make it better. We have some opportunities to help both boards. I think we ought to take advantage of them. I think they heard our thoughts, though. They have to look at their budget besides these opportunities. Do they have any soft spots in their budget where maybe they could look at it and find some other savings? We're asking for everyone to be realistic, too. It's not just, we're doing our part, and we're working as hard as we can. And I know last year was a great year. We found $600,000 in insurance.
Working hard to.
All right, so make sure everyone's working hard.
Working hard.
And I just wanted to echo where Peter was going with that last statement. I've been trying to get my hand up there for a while. I do think it's incumbent on us to ante up everything that we can to put on the table, and it's incumbent on everyone else as well. And I know I talked with you guys today a little bit about, I don't want us to feel like, hey, we found some one-time savings, so we don't need to look at the fundamental infrastructure of any budget. I mean, we should always be looking at those to try to make sure we're getting the best value. And I know you guys have given us a little memo that I haven't had a chance to read yet, but one of the things I asked you in the conversation today that is maybe answered in this memo is, what are the initiatives you had? You gave us a nice list of things that have worked on or are working, but I just want to invite you to talk about what are some of the cost-saving projects that you're exploring going forward to sort of reassure the public that you are indeed not just counting on all of this manna from heaven, but that you're really working on your own budget to find infrastructural savings that can be useful on a forward-going basis. And I don't know if that's what's in this memo that you left on our table.
That touches on some of it. That memo is an update to the one that I did last year, and focuses on the maintenance spending portion of the statute. But in terms of some of the things that we touched on there, Joe and I have worked together on, there was a telephone and data audit opportunity, so we each took advantage of that. Our savings is not large, but there's almost $1,900 of savings that will continue there as a result of that for us. The area, along with Tom Roy, that Joe and I worked on is an energy management data group that helps us now more on the town side with the paying of the various bills, because they have a lot more volume of bills, but also on tracking the energy usage. So Tom and Joe and I are hoping to be able to gain better results to see, how is our usage trending, and be able to verify some of those savings that that we're hoping to achieve through the efficiency projects.
Is that in the budget? That piece?
That piece is not assuming any fixed amount of savings. It's more about getting the database set up to have the ability to track and manage energy usage better. So that's really the first piece of it. I don't believe Tom is showing any savings on the town side yet.
But better information.
So those are two updated pieces that are within that memo. And then in terms of the larger structural things I want to speak to, we continue to work on how to support each other in the benefits function, but we're mutually upstairs and down really trying to deal with the next phases of the implementation of Affordable Care Act. So we're working closely there. We are looking at wellness from an overall benefit to our health self-insurance fund. We actually have a second meeting with Cigna, and we're excited about some opportunities that they're providing some monies, which was a part of the carrier consolidation, that they've pledged $45,000 per year to help us with wellness programs for our staff, which will then hopefully yield with better, healthier staff and keep those costs going down. We have a large conversation that Tom Cook, myself, Lisa, and Matt have been talking about. While we have seen a lot of cooperative efforts for the IT end of things, both in the infrastructure and fiber, as well as the fact that we share the costs of the town IT staff, and then we in exchange have their services for the Board of Ed tech work. But we've each been working with a similar consultant on getting kind of the vision of moving forward. That group is known as CCAT, and I'm forgetting that it's Connecticut Center for Advanced Technology, I believe. And they're a group that we're talking to about how to help us look for other areas that we might be able to help each other out more, and that's something that we're looking to.
That area really,
start.
conversationally, at least as we kicked it off, seemed like a good fit in terms of at least really analyzing any redundancy, any functions, and any real opportunity for a structural change in terms of a shared service. So we're just kicking those conversations off now. We had 2 meetings and potentially bring somebody in to really kind of audit those things and look at CCAT's information. We actually met with, Craig came in and met with them initially. It was Mary in the regionalization office, just to kind of talk through what they could potentially take a look at. So, that's an area that I don't know what kind of savings we'll see, but it's a pretty significant conversation because they're definitely parallel structures right now.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say you're doing those things, and I think it would go a long way to reassuring me and others. If you had kind of a list, I know when I've been in executive positions before, you keep a list. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get to them all this year, but I just kind of want to know, well, what's on the list of things that you hope to explore in the next, 1 to 3 years as potential cost-saving programs. There's always ideas that come up that end up not panning out, and others do pan out. And I think it's just a good thing to, make the public realize that you're pursuing those in good faith, and the way to do that is to be a little public about them, if that's not too much to ask.
I'm thrilled to hear that. Met with Mary, because she is, as you know, perhaps, preeminent in the field of finding cost efficiencies and reducing cost. And when Mike was talking about the transportation of our kids sometimes going an hour and a half away, I was thinking about, correct.
That's actually something that we asked at that meeting that I spoke to Mary about. So.
That's perfect. And I first looked at your snow removal budget, and I was disappointed, thinking you were being pessimistic. You've only spent $4,600 to date, and yet you're projecting a year-end expenditure of $20,000. And I'm thinking this winter will never end because you only spent $4,600 through January. And
most of the snow came in February.
At the end of the year. So we must be getting a heck of a lot more snow in. But then I saw on this other list that you've been doing some collaborative work here with snow removal. But again, I think small items. $4,600 through January, projected end of the year 10,000. You did reduce for next year to 10,000, which is great. I'm just hoping that maybe throughout the budget you can chew that up and look at other places where costs were lower, and you can take those savings, because I think there's a few $100,000 worth of them in here if we're entirely accurate. And I understand you need to have some fungible money, but I think there are other areas in the budget I saw that I didn't even question, where I suspect everything won't go kind of worst case scenario for you, and you'll have some money there.
Just to put that a little in perspective, though, Jeff, I think we got to be very careful about, as you said, sort of increasing the precision or tightening it up and avoiding slush funds. I think you're down to figure it this way: 1% is $670,000. We're talking about 0.2% when we get down to $130,000. I wouldn't be comfortable coming to this board of the taxpayers and saying, well, we can manage that precisely. We're so good at managing a $67 million budget that we can predict $10,000 differential in snow removal and $100,000 in savings here and there. We've got to try to save wherever we can, and believe me, we all understand that. But you know, when you talk about budgeting, and this time of year, and you start saying words like precision and talking about numbers of 100,000, I think that's a very dangerous game to play. I don't think we can operate that way.
I'm not talking about 100,000, I'm talking about areas where just
Well,
looking at the.
100,000 is what you were referring to in some transportation.
Let me finish. When I looked at one page, there was a differential based on the current run rate through January of 7 months. There was a differential of like $450,000. So I'm not asking for perfect precision, but Burke already admitted that there are areas they rely on where they have other costs they can draw from those. And what I'm saying is, let's just be clean. Let's put the numbers down based on our best projections and not look for bumping them up.
And do you think they have, so you think that's what's not been done so far?
Well, that's what I think, that's when I look at the numbers and when Burke tells me what they've done, yeah.
So you don't believe the integrity of the numbers?
Mike?
I didn't say I'm not believing the integrity of the numbers.
Well,
You're getting
hold
personal.
on, that's
You're getting
exactly what
personal.
you're
You're
saying.
putting
You
words
use the
with
term
Mike.
slush fund.
Mike, Burke
You start
said.
talking about $120,000 on a $67 million budget.
I'm not talking about
That's
$120,000, Mike. Mike, don't put words in my mouth. Don't make it personal.
I'm repeating back to you what you said.
Mike, Burke referred to it in all practical purposes as basically a slush fund, okay? He said we have to have areas where we can draw the money from other areas.
using the term
Go
slush
back
fund
and
at
listen.
all.
Okay, go back and listen to the tape, Mike. Okay, I'm not going to get into an argument with you, but I'm simply telling you that if you look at the other towns, and Lydia is all over the state, I know with her broader Board of Education work, I'd like to know how West Hartford is doing it for 7.5% less. I know there are a lot of kids in that town who move there with special needs and what have you. They have different demographics than our community has. Avon, 5%, Glassbury, 5%, and 6%. And as Linda said, we can't continue to go with this trend. So we're simply asking you to do what we're doing, which is to look at every area of efficiency where you're not denigrating the value of services in our town, but do it more efficiently. And this is what corporate America is doing. This is what governments are doing throughout the land. It's what happens in our Chromebooks. Okay, we're funding Chromebooks. You know, I'm on call 24/7 where I work in the state of Connecticut. I have my personal smartphone. I pay for that. I get calls on that. I use it for work. You know, my wife works for Hartford. She's required to have a smartphone. She pays for the smartphone. She pays for the service. I mean, you know, there are other ways to fund Chromebooks. I'm not questioning that here, but I'm telling you that there are a lot of areas in here where you can come up with other ideas. And I'm not saying you're not working hard. You are. I'm not questioning the integrity, but what I'm looking at here are numbers that don't make sense after 7 months. After 7 months, look at the run rate, do the numbers yourself, and there are more than $500,000 here. And explain that.
Mike,
I speak for the board in saying that we would disagree with you.
Mike, a few minutes ago, Matt spoke of my frustration a couple of years ago. And it has to do with a lot of what's in these yellow sheets. Because over and over again, I see places where, and I'll just read you a line, I won't even mention what it is, but last year you spent $217,000. You budgeted for the current year $212,000. So far you've spent $272,000. You say that you're going to spend $288,000, and next year you want $212,000 again. It doesn't make any sense. Unless there's something in the explanation, which very often you tell us on the lower page what's in the item, but you don't say what's going on. And that's where I think I sense my frustration. There are places over and over where either you're under budgeting or over budgeting, and I just sit here and say, gee, you know, the law of large numbers tells me that when you put the whole thing together, you're probably going to come in reasonably close to what your overall budget is, but there's no way for us as a board to assess it. And that's where my frustration is.
Well, there's no way for us as a board to manage account by account. At the end of the day, all we've got to do is try to come in at a total number. That's the way most budgets work, right? So, you know, at the end, I don't know how we can satisfy your frustration except perhaps having you sit through the the budget process from November with us, so that you get a sense of where the line items are coming from.
Yeah, but
We can't do that in a 1-hour session.
My problem is that over and over again, I see here the budget for next year is exactly the same as the budget for this year, with no change, and yet there's a lot of stuff going on.
Regardless of actuals.
And I sit there and say, why? Now, I really don't want to dwell on this. I mean, that's not, where I'm coming from. I echo what Linda was saying a moment ago, that we really need to look at the overall context of this thing and try and figure out what are the things that we can be doing in the future that'll make it better. Nobody here wants the Simsbury school system to not have the high-quality program that you've put in place. We all appreciate that.
I think our board's responsibility is to approve a bottom-line budget, and I think we ask probing questions to get a feel for the budget. I mean, my sense is that everything can't be always right. It's a moving target. I feel good overall with the budget, but I think it's a fair question to ask, comparability to other towns in total. That might be a reasonable request, not necessarily to work out in the next month, but over in the next 6 months or so. How do we compare ourselves to another town? I don't know if that's an easy task or a hard one. I assume it's very difficult to do.
Well, I've got an exhibit here that CCM puts out, and the data comes from the Office of Policy and Management. And the towns that are shown here are Avon, Farmington, Glastonbury, Guilford, New Milford, Newtown, Ridgefield, Simsbury, and South Windsor. And what it shows is the percentage of the town's budget that goes to education and all other. In other words, it's basically looking at the education budget as a percentage of the town. And every one of these towns, and this looks at years 2010 through 2014, every one of these towns is in the 62 to 64% range, except Simsbury. And we're at 71 to 72%. And I don't understand why we see that kind of trend. I mean, there may be a good logical explanation for this, but it sticks out like a sore thumb.
And I think that's some of the stuff that we need to do as the long-range planning group that Joe's going to pull together next week, is to identify those metrics.
Yeah, and we need to be a little careful on that one, because if they have high debt, because we are so good with our debt, then the debt goes in general government and isn't showing in the schools, and that could be worth 10 points right there. So and that's the question, and Linda brought this up the day she got on the board, and I think we didn't do anything with it, which is, what are the right statistics that we want to use to compare ourselves? Because we don't really have a set of metrics that is our set of metrics that we think are the most important. And we're all picking on different metrics because we don't have that preferred set as a group we've developed, and I think maybe...
That together.
Yeah, I think maybe that's something...
That is not a new stat,
Right.
right? We've heard that for many years. That didn't just happen. And then one of those other stats that's relevant that Matt and I looked at through the collective bargaining process was the percentage of school-age kids versus the overall town population. We seem to be a little bit different there. So you have to look at a series of metrics, like you said. You can't look at any single.
And in terms of year over year, as we say, there's a lot of statistics to look at. Year over year planning, we provided it there in terms of requested budget increases comparable to our DERG over the last 4 years. We're the third lowest out of the 20 or so districts. So I just don't want the conversation to turn where a tenor where we feel people aren't being responsible in their planning and moving things forward. So I mean, I want to end it with that, and I just want to say that, we have to work collectively on this. We continue to look at various areas to come in at a comparable rate that's been extremely low, comparable to other towns. And I agree, we have to line up metrics, and through different lenses, they look different ways, but we do need to come to an agreement on what those are. And I think achievement and programming needs to be in the mix as well. Jeff, you referenced that several times. We have very rich programming at Simsbury High School that we're proud of. So I don't want to speak to that as if it's some sort of hindrance, that it's what makes our school system great.
We need to do a better job marketing that. I can tell you, I'm not happy. I'm losing the battle with people who are looking to move to the region. Very sophisticated, high wage earners, and are moving to towns like Avon. When I compare the curriculum in our high school, and I challenge them to compare the curriculum that we have versus we have in Avon.
There's data we can look at to that. I mean, if we're going to have those conversations, I'd love to ground them in data too, you know?
I think one of the things we talked about in terms of long-range goals was to do something communication-wise, and frankly, if we can have a second year in a row of no tax increase, which is our stated goal, that's something we need to do some serious press work on and talk to every realtor out there, because that's, shows that the town is,
So we have to make sure
what
we're
other town could brag that they've done 2 years in a row of no tax
But then we're
increases?
maintaining the proper education. We're
Exactly.
not
That
taking
we've
the
got
school
great,
system
great
apart.
outcomes.
We're not taking the town apart.
Right.
We're still maintaining the quality,
Yeah.
the reason people move here. They move here for the neighborhood schools, the education system, the recreation,
And other
quality of life.
reasons, yeah.
the- You know,
And all I'm
and,
saying is get as close to accurate as you can. I don't want to come back later in the year and saying something went the wrong direction.
So,
Yeah.
can I just add, last year, I was entertained when the Board of Selectmen sat in front of us and said, you pick on us much more than you ever pick on the Board of Ed. And we laughed and we said, no, you have to come to the Board of Ed meeting, you'll be equally entertained. I just want to make sure that we appreciate, a ton of information went to us. It's a lot more information than we got if you go back years. And it can be better. There's tweaks every year that makes it better. And I think that's the kind of stuff we're talking about, is how do we keep the quality education but improve the budgeting process, because we're financial kind of nerds in this board. We want to make the budgeting process better every year, and that's kind of what we're pushing at you at. And it's not a distrust or not a respect for the amount of work you put in to make this happen. It's just how do we make it better as a team, for next year's budget and as we go forward. And I think that's the intent of the comments, and some of it got a little personal. I don't think it was ever intended that way. I think we're all trying to come up with a better product.
I appreciate the presentation. I think we have a thorough understanding of your budget. I know I spent hours reading it,
Yeah, me
and we
too.
still have a lot of work to do, and I have a phone call with the actuary tomorrow. So we'll keep moving, and I think if your board goes back and looks and we get some harder numbers for you in our meeting the 17th, we can wrap up some numbers. I think we can all get a more positive result. And
So Peter, can you just walk through what the next, just remind me, I've only been through this once. Do we go back to them now and say, okay, this is all we're going to give you? Or do they come back to us and present a revised budget that's more along the lines of what we're asking them?
right, well, I think as we get more harder numbers in these areas, maybe in the past, the actuary's report wasn't out, so they had the budget with a concept. We're going to have the exact numbers. So it's easier to get to Jeff's point, here's the number. So you're getting more knowns. So as we get knowns, we're going to get the knowns in the next week or two. I
And
think
then
the
do we give
process should be
them
go back to their
clear
board, to look at
guidance?
the knowns. They have, it's their budget, and they should decide they want to take advantage of these opportunities. And we could even put another one on there, probably a fourth one on there, what the numbers are, and then come back with a budget. And then we either send the budget on or send it back and say, we want the
I just don't want them to waste their time, if they come back to us with it looks like a 1.8 budget is where they're heading, and we say, no, that's not good enough. I don't want them to be spinning their
Well,
wheels, so.
But I think after, there's really another half a point we're talking about here in other areas. So they're 1.8, I got it down to about 1.3. So I think they're going to be coming back with about a 1.3 when we get done doing these other three areas.
And is that something you think you're doing too, 1.3?
I don't know what these other areas are.
Yeah, he's not talking about them doing anything. That's all
More use of
stuff
the
coming
internal
at this
service
end.
fund and
Right.
additional
I had-
overhead
The
reductions.
main-
I have a comfort level.
The pieces of the
Okay.
$1 million that I was talking about last month, it may be a bigger number than that.
Okay.
Basically-
I just want to make sure everybody
there's
is
three areas.
hearing the right.
Three areas. Number
We're
one,
comfortable when the decisions have been made from a policy standpoint, and all these factors, I believe, we're comfortable with. We've talked about them already, and if there's additional factors in the same,
three factors.
Right.
First
That's
factor is on
additional
energy.
energy,
That
yeah.
number's going to change, it's going to go up.
OPEB
if you've got the cash.
and health reserves.
If we pay the cash, all right, so that's easier concept. So instead of 80,000, it's 150,000, so that goes up. The OPEB will change if we get the right assumption, the right investment return in there. The actuary will be about 80,000 in that range, depending on how she figures interest. And then if we decide to use money out of the reserves from the self-insurance fund, your share of that could be about 225,000. So those three add up to 380 in my book, and that's roughly half a point. So a half a point in addition to that gets you down about 1.3. So
1.3.
that's-
And so I guess
that's what I'm thinking.
my residual question is, Jeff and Barbara had talked about some energy things, fuel costs, and it wasn't 100% clear to me whether that was all factored in or whether there were other things that you thought you could come back with. And are we asking them, I mean, I don't want them to go away saying, oh, good, we're at 1.3, that we don't need to do anything, if in fact there's more you can do.
I think there were questions, and I think we said we're willing to take a look, and we got to let that process play. For me to
Okay.
get a question and...
I just want to make sure our
I assume
communications
they're
are
going to
clear.
revisit what we
America
talked
value
about
to it,
and
commit to it.
come back.
I'm not
They-
comfortable with.
They have the opportunity to revisit their
Okay.
numbers, and we're going to give them the areas to work in. Besides that, we're going to enhance those. And then if they want to revisit some of their numbers based on the questions and conversation we had, that's their prerogative.
Yeah, but to partly answer Linda's question, next week, we have a regular Board of Finance meeting, and we're going to obviously be talking about this more. And then 2 weeks later, on the 31st, the Board of Selectmen presents their budget.
Right.
But the key to this is the April 8th date, where we need to have all the numbers put together,
Right.
and we make a presentation or, to the town for public hearing. And that's the next key step before we eventually get this down to what's going to go into the referendum.
I assume the
Well, I
process,
trust with these factors, you get at the next meeting, the mill rate worksheet comes out, and this is where you're playing with the number to get to whatever determination.
Yeah, I think
goal.
so.
Okay.
If I could be more specific too on a couple of the items, on the spend here, I think you've got 987,200, and this must be the electricity line. At the current run rate, you're at 721,000 on the year, and you're requesting 987,000, so you've got a delta of about $276,000 there, and I guess I'd like to know between that program and the increase that you're anticipating for electricity costs, if you expect it's going to be, whether there's some savings we're taking in terms of
Could I
76,000.
make a suggestion? Could we just agree that I'll go over some of that detail with you and share it with everybody also?
Great.
Yeah, no, but I thought you wanted some specifics of other areas where you should be targeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can talk to them and then
I'm just,
send them some
I'm just
notes.
making sure that my takeaway is the same as yours. I think the only area I might differ is I agree that we can be more accurate on the budget starting and based on current year estimates of where we start next year. But in those areas where, as I use the word cushion, there's other accounts where I really then have to go and increase for the same reason.
I think
So
you
it's
should.
not going to be a net savings.
It's a very different picture
Is
of special education.
is all I'm trying to say.
I'm fine with that, but that's.
We aren't sitting on net savings.
But when I talk about slush fund, what I'm talking about is having money there that you don't need and putting it somewhere else, and maybe you need it somewhere else. So let's just
Exactly.
true up and let's
We're
be
saying the
accurate
same thing
across
about
Be
it.
accurate.
I'm just looking for accuracy because it undermines the integrity of your budget process if you do that.
So I think we're done with their presentation. We've asked our questions. I think they're going to go back and talk. We're going to get some better numbers for them so they have more absolutes. And then they'll come back to us with a budget. When do you envision coming back, Matt?
We have a meeting on the 24th.
Right. So by the time we meet, what's our last meeting in March? 31st, we'll have a revised budget back. And then when we get that in the selectmen, then we have to decide if we move on. Okay? Or we can send back or change it, we can make anything we want at that point in time. So, we feel comfortable with it, we move it on. If we don't, we change. So, that sound reasonable? Yeah. All right, we appreciate your conversation. I thought this was an excellent presentation, very in-depth, and 19 years I've been on here, it's the best one I've seen, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciated all of the material to read. It was very helpful.
Now, we got the budget update. Anything there, Joe? 14, 15, nothing? Nothing, okay.
It's mostly been passed and agreed upon what the thought is.
Other items, just, I've talked about them tonight, but basically, we're gonna, at the next meeting, we'll hand out the policies that have to be adopted, all right? And that's gonna be the non-lapsing account, all right? So make sure we're comfortable with it, so we can pass it at the next meeting.
Wait a minute, do we have new language on the,
So for you to look at.
and you'll send that to us prior to the meeting?
I'll give you now.
Okay.
This is just non-lapsing, I highlighted it in bold.
And I think I sent you proposed language too, right? So
On the savings.
No?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I didn't.
Yeah.
But I'd gladly take it, and I also lost your copy of your other thing that you revised for me twice already. It's been,
God, what was it?
well,
I don't
the
even remember.
Fire marshal basically condemned my office. It sounds like Linda.
What did he do to Hiram Peck's office?
He's not allowed up there. I think Joan was up there.
Boy.
Yeah, I had sent you an email. I don't have the copy of the email, I think.
Okay, I thought it was.
Just to address the 1% cap issue, that if we wanted to stick to that, I tried to give you language, but
Why
I
do we
can
want to
look
stick
that
to
up.
No,
that?
I can take a look at it.
And maybe we don't. I mean, but
I just wanted to
I
ask, do
just
we want to
I
stick
want
to
to
that?
pass the fund.
Right,
If we do it by the statute, you can only put 1% a year in.
right.
It's been brought up that we don't want it to be more than a year, so that's what we're trying to do. Otherwise, we just pass the statute, and I'm happy.
Well, it was,
Brought it up,
it was
yeah.
more that it was
Pardon me, you're right.
portrayed that it was capped at 1%, but what I found was that the statute, in fact, doesn't do that. So we were all saying yes, 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 and it's like, all right, well, but we were saying yes to something that was not accurately portrayed.
In my
so-
opinion, if we don't like what happens, we can then undo it at any time and change it, so.
But doesn't it make sense to open it on day one, just we're adopting the statute under the statute terms and not restrict ourselves till we know how it's going to work?
Yes.
Because we can always restrict it later,
So not to.
But that-
not to limit it. I
And
mean,
let it roll over.
Right, for now.
But does that create an incentive, and I don't know, but does that create an incentive to sort of over budget and build up a big, huge reserve so you can go buy
Like I
a
say,
toy?
if there's a reserve in there, two things will happen. Number one, their budget will get lowered, and number two, we'll get rid of it and take it back in the general fund. That's-
Exactly.
That's what will happen.
Except that the way it was written, I thought, said that you had to have approval of both boards, so you couldn't unilaterally take it back.
We set it up, we can unset it up. They don't set it up, we set it up.
We can set line items.
We set the fund up, we can unset the fund.
Yeah, there's no problem, really.
They aren't setting the fund up, we are. Their board's not approving setting up the
And
fund.
we may not be able to control what's already in there, but we can control the future of it.
Yes.
That's
So in
what I
other
think
words,
there's-
they have to bring forward an expenditure, which both boards sign off on, but we can then just dissolve the fund. And then it goes back to the general fund.
Yeah, which is a nasty thing to do. I mean,
Yeah, we want to create
Well, that's true.
the appropriate
I mean,
incentives.
that's like a big bar.
We want an incentive.
We want
to
incentive for
have them
savings.
Produce savings, yes.
Yeah. I don't have a feeling one way or the other. I'm just trying to play it out in my mind to.
This is relatively new.
But your concern is real. It could happen,
Yeah.
but you guys would have to take action. And it's gonna have to be managed.
I think,
He's responsible.
yeah,
He's
and
gonna
I
look
think,
very
I
good.
mean, given how long we've all worked together, sort of take the example of, we have the internal service fund balance. Well, so what if our fund got above the 1%? You're gonna take that into consideration when setting the guideline for the next year.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think we're all gonna be looking at it and saying, hey, why and what?
But this is different. This is something that we're looking for you to spend money, to save money. It's money you might not otherwise spend.
No.
No, that's not what we're talking
This is
about.
the wrong fund,
Oh.
wrong thing.
Oh, we
Jeff.
are?
This is the non-lapsing account.
Well, we are, but that's something separate.
But isn't that the intent?
Not of this.
No. This is for them not to spend money to build a cushion, so to speak, as has been tossed out, and then to use that to give them financial flexibility in their budgets where they have unusual circumstances.
Oh, what happened
That's
to
what
the
this
other-
is for.
What happened to the other fund?
We didn't get there yet.
Yeah, we're not
It's
talking
coming.
about that.
That's Tuesday.
Okay.
Right.
Now, on the other fund,
So your language, sorry to interrupt, but the language you just handed us has that 1% cap in it. So we may want to take that out. Okay.
why don't people put suggestions to Joe, and
Yeah.
let's decide what's the easiest way to do it, and we'll hand something out before the next meeting, so everyone can sign off on it, and we have to pass something, though, at the next meeting.
Yeah, and we also have to do the capital non-recurring for savings, right?
Now,
Can I just ask how much we've,
Well, maybe,
how much
maybe
has
not.
been left over in each of
the
the last
conversation was
budgets
just
of the
give them
last 5 years?
You looking for Board of Ed term back?
Like how much term?
Yeah, in your 30-year history tab, you'll see that, term record. It's, you know, I can tell you it's less than 20,000. And this past year it was just a couple thousand.
So I mean,
And that's
I'm not
fairly
sure this
typical.
fund is gonna
Well,
get much play. This isn't I mean, I was really hoping on the other fund, you know, we'd be looking to encourage the right behaviors, but it looks like they're gonna, if we're gonna take it into consideration, they're gonna spend it, then why have the fund?
Because the purpose of the fund is to encourage them not to spend it. That in theory, one would argue historically, if they had money left at year end, government entities sometimes use it in the current year, because if they don't, they lose it. And this is, the whole purpose of this is to create an incentive that if there's a little extra, they don't have to spend it right now because they can put it away and use it when they need it.
But then we're considering it in the following year budget process, so it creates a disincentive.
So we're considering it to the extent it appears to run excessive. So it's intended to build up and give them some flexibility in managing their budget year to year for those changes. And we would only have the conversation if we thought it was excessive at that point.
Would it, and it wouldn't be limited to those line items. So if the library director, let's say, has
No, library is a
150,000.
school.
It's a school thing only.
It's a school only.
It is absolutely
No,
what
but
it
I'm
is.
talking about like the school libraries, they put $100,000 in there for books. Let's say they decide they put a better purchasing arrangement and they're gonna only spend $100,000, they lose $50,000. It goes into the general Board of Education budget. They don't get to use that to enhance the library programs. I just don't know how we're gonna create
Sure
incentives.
they can, they gotta go talk through them, the budget process.
Well, I mean, they can ask to have it dedicated back to their programs the following year, but it's gonna get, I don't know, I'm just not sure this creates
See,
many
they
incentives.
manage their whole budget. We don't have line item veto on their
No, I know.
budget.
Does this create incentives from to not?
It has in all the other towns
It
that
it
it's been
did,
set up.
it did
has?
when we put it in West Haven, absolutely. We went from overspending of, upwards of $1 million a year to all of a sudden they were putting away $200,000-300,000 a year, and it helped.
So at the end of the year, rather than turn the money back to the town, school boards, even if they don't need to spend it, they spend it because they're going to lose it.
That was
Nobody
my,
would
I
say
haven't
they
seen
do
that here, but yes, in West
No, that's
Haven,
not good here, but I'm
I
saying
absolutely
that's-
did see that.
But I don't think that's what happens here, so
Well, you have a very, you guys have a very good Board of Education, as I said last time, but,
does the Board of Education use this and that'd be helpful?
I think we're showing in our budget presentation, that we think working together will help taxpayers, it will help everybody.
Well, then I'm comfortable with it, but I just don't know.
Well,
The history
we'll have it
doesn't
so we
happen
can
here.
vote on it next week, and, people have to vote how they feel. So this will be one we're gonna be voting on.
We're going to vote the other one next week?
Number 2 is
CNR savings
the
program.
CNR savings. Now, we'd pass that out, but my thought is on this one project, it's so overwhelming that we can solve this one by just doing a transfer out of the current year's budget of 300 and some odd thousand for the savings of 100.5. I mean, it's such enormous payback that it just gives them, benefit. Or we can set it up through the other fund, set the fund up, and then make them pay 10% of the savings back and not get the full benefit.
So I like the idea of funding it in full. One, because I want that 150 in the budget, but I also like it because it's not like we have a list of a bunch of other projects that they're going to need the money for next year. And if we do put something in there and tie it up for that, which was part of the conversation, then it may be we're tying some money up for a fund that there isn't even any projects for, because this is really
Right.
the only apple in anybody's eye right now.
I mean, it's not to say we can't set that fund up for the future, but for this, just for expediency, I think it's better just to fund it out of the current year's reserve, or current year's operating budget. We have that 1% guideline, and I think we could use money there and pay for it, and it will help them next year. And as
And then
long
we
as
hold off on setting up that
Right.
other fund right now.
I guess I'd like to
I agree.
see us funded, but I'd like to see us set through the fund too. I'd
But
like to see us.
there's no list of things potentially needed in that
So I
fund.
want them to be identifying those opportunities,
Sure.
and they're out there.
The only area on the CNR one that we really need to clarify, and it's bounced around from term to term, is what is the repayment? What are we doing for the repayment? Because I don't want this to be a science project. I don't want to have to go back in every single project and say, well, it's 10% of the savings. How much did we really save this year? I want to actually pick some sort of repayment period, have it be 5, 7, 10 years. Maybe you do have some variations based on the useful life of the product, but I want to try and shy away from the savings calculation.
So this goes to my point, I think, a few weeks ago, that I don't want to produce an accounting nightmare for you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm coming from the place, I agree, but, and I'm coming from a place where to do it right and to match payback periods to investments, it is an accounting nightmare. And because I think it's kind of important that you don't pay it back over 10 years if you get it in 2, or pay it back in 3 if you don't get it for 10, it ends up costing you more than not using the fund. That I think that's why right now, unless we had a bunch of projects to think about running through it, that we could analyze and pick a term that we could all agree on, it's probably premature to set the fund up.
Right, that's why I think the fund, we have some more, there's a mixed opinion out there how to do the payback, so I think we have to go through that thought process. But for this budget cycle, I don't believe we're going to agree on how we think that fund's going to operate. So that's why I said, gee, let's go back, just pay for this.
One project.
It's easier to do it that way. Everyone can see the savings, it's so significant.
Yeah.
If we're talking 50,000 of savings, different animal.
Yeah.
But it's so significant, it's worth looking at, just paying for it to help. Then we keep talking about the fund, but we don't have to do that in the next 3 weeks.
Right.
So we will, that'll be on our list to do, and we'll get that, because I think you're right, we need that in there for the incentive. So it's not going away, it's just, we're not doing it this month. Does that sound reasonable?
I'm certainly comfortable funding the whole thing. Anything we can do to align incentives, though, would be great, because we're all trying to do the.
Right. Now, the next area is the excess reserves on the self-insurance fund. We need the number from Mr. Lindbergh as far as what it is, and then we're going to say, here's the number, and based on what I took from his notes, and if you look at our October meeting, he gave the percentages. It was 27% of the cost of the health insurance plan and
Above and beyond IBNR?
Yes. I don't know. He didn't say above and beyond. He just said 27%. It wasn't.
He didn't mention IBNR.
He didn't mention IBNR. So that's why a call would be helpful. I'm not going to call him. Joe's going to call him.
What was the date on that one, Pete?
Pardon?
Was that November or December meeting?
October. Right here.
I
I got a copy of his, what he said. Right here. It looks like this. October 21st, right here. He said 27% of the medical plan self-funded reserve target, and dental plan's 8%.
But I'm suspecting that, typically IBNR in health is like 3 months' worth of claims, so
Right.
that's suspiciously close to 27%.
So doing that, right, doing that math is 2.2,997,000, or say $3 million.
But the 6 million we have is, we already have an IBNR account.
I know.
So that's why.
If we can take IBNR out, it's even more.
Well, what Linda's saying
No,
is,
what
is it?
It may be that the
can we
whole
just use the IBNR for our
Right.
reserve, and do we?
But that's what I'm saying. If we can do
Anything
that,
beyond that.
then instead of putting 3 million aside, we have 1.2 million in IBNR. So I don't know the answer, but if we went conservative, let's say it's 3 million is planned reserves, we have 3.5 million excess at this point in time. It could be higher.
And I don't know, we want to touch that all at once.
Right, so that's why,
Well, that's
Yeah,
what-
that's why if we sit there and say, all right, let's take 10% out, let's say we take 300,000 out, I don't think we need much more than 300,000 when we start putting the numbers up.
But I like the idea of using, if it's possible, and I don't even know if it is, to
Use it
put some of
over.
it into, pay off OPEB or
Right.
pensions, which gives you a long-range annual savings for
Right.
many years.
I'd love to, and I shocked everyone, I said, well, gee, I told them to ask Becky, let's say we transferred 5 million over to OPEB. And that's basically half of the unfunded liability.
Right.
Would we get the savings? And she said, yes. And then 5 million's a bit extreme, and I picked that because it's half of our liability, not because it was a right number. But the concept is, we can put money over there, and I talked to her about that today. So I told her, we're gonna probably, by next meeting, know if we're thinking about that, and we'll fund it. Because if we do, and we put, let's say, $1 million over, we will get another $65,000 savings on that OPEB number. She can recalculate her number for next year's budget. I asked her 3 times for next year's budget, because she's tough to pin down on that.
Yep.
So she said she can. I said, well, if our board's leaning towards putting $1 million over there just to try it and see how it works, that's real long-term savings. It gives budget relief. And I think that's what we ought to move towards, but
Right.
I think we have to be comfortable with the concept before we do it.
Yeah.
Not just,
Yeah.
because once we do it, it's there,
It's
it's
there.
permanent.
You can't take it back.
That's permanent.
I think we just need to evaluate, we're over-reserved by
Right.
X amount
Yeah.
based on actuarial assumptions,
Yep.
and based on that, how much do we have?
I tried to get some kind of guidelines out of national associations and They didn't have any, and
No.
I started to conclude that that's because, aside from IBNR, they don't think you need to reserve more than that.
And we do have stop loss kicking at a low amount, and that's a huge help.
Right.
That's why I think if we decide a dollar amount we want to put over, so we at least help the budgets, and then we agree that we're going to try to come up with the excess reserve, transfer something by June 30th over to OPEB, and I can tell Becky we're thinking about a number of $1 million. Could she recalculate the OPEB? She'll calculate it. Now, so think about it. If you're ready to go with a number we feel comfortable with next meeting, we can come up with a number. But, maybe we do $1 million, $2 million at the most, but at least we do something, and that can get us some more relief.
One thing you guys do have to talk about tonight is the 7.5 versus 7%, whether you wanted to go back to the 7.5.
Assumption of interest.
But guys, there's definitely an opportunity, right? If we'd paid in the $5 million, I believe it saved us, what, was it 300,000? 307, it was basically the entirety of the ARC. But that's at the 7% interest. At the 7.5, it might be like a $3 million number that saves you 300,000. And that's every year.
And I guess I would ask you, the expert, is a 7.5% interest assumption realistic? I mean, you're going to know that more than I am.
And I guess-
Based on our experience thus far, have we been getting 7.5%?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So your pension and your OPEB returned 15% last year, which is
Well,
part
that's
of
last year. That was a boom year.
But right
You
now,
gotta look at the
right now you're at
20-year
like
average.
4.5, 5% so far this year. So it's within range.
We can always adjust it later.
You got to look at a long period.
We can get the long-term schedule from the investment advisors. They give us a long-term, what we've earned since inception.
Right.
I think when we were at the pension subcommittee, they had that, and I asked that question, is this rate a realistic rate? I ask them every meeting. That's the one question I ask him. And they so far say yes.
Okay,
Well,
then let's do it.
Yeah, but I will reiterate, the rate that we use for OPEB is not necessarily the same rate we want to use for the pension. And we brought the pension down to 7%, but the liabilities for OPEB are different. I mean, it's health-related, and, the 7.5 may be adequate there, but, we just need to recognize that because one's at one level, it doesn't mean the other one has to be the same place.
But this
One other point of
is about
information.
investment returns, not costs.
One other point of information.
You're really, you see, the liabilities drive what you need to do.
So if you're drawing down, you won't have as much to invest, and therefore your returns will be lower. Is that what you're saying?
Well, partly, but I mean, what the actuary is doing is using that as a discount rate, not so much as, I mean, yes, it's used for trying to do the actuarial projection of the assets.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question about that. But, I mean, it's really a discount rate that they use for looking at the liability side as well.
Okay.
So, now, the risk is when I talked to her, the actuarial standards changed for next year, okay? So now she's held to a standard, because she has to opine upon the rate. Are we in a reasonable range now? And 7 and 7.5 are both in that reasonable range. Because remember, she came and said it should be 6 3/4 to 7 3/4. I think they said, and at that point, we lowered our pension down to 7. We kept our OPEB at 7.5, because in my mind, we were there because we are the leader in the state on OPEB funding. We are 44% funded. If we go to 7.5, we're 49% funded. Nobody. Next 10 towns can't get to there. So we're doing well. So 7.5, so maybe it could be on the high side of the range, but now with the new actuarial standards, she has to use best estimate, not a range anymore. So I don't know what that means. She doesn't know what it
Well,
means.
she needs to tell us what her best estimate is,
Right.
and and we're gonna set the rate. I mean,
And it shouldn't change every year either. I
That's
mean, that's
correct.
not how you.
That's why she doesn't know, because she's never done that.
Right.
She hasn't done best estimate. So she's going to go based on investment returns and how we're invested, and look at that, come up with her best estimate.
she's also gonna look at how we rate compared to all the other towns
Right.
in Connecticut, and she's
So-
gonna tell us we're right smack in, where we ought to be,
When did we make the change? Was it last year or 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
A couple of years ago on the pension, OPEB, we made it, when we first put it in, we came in with a lower rate than their pension. Our pension used to be 8. We came in with 7.5 on our OPEB. Pension then went down to 7 3/4. And then a couple of years ago, when all of a sudden everyone said, gee, that's that still might be in the high side. We're still in an acceptable range. We decided to go down to 7. We had a big change.
And that
Put
was
a lot of pressure
It's a
on our
big
budget.
charge to our
Right.
boards, yeah.
So now, I think, 7.5, we should keep it where it is, but there is some risk that an actuary could say, gee, I think it's a different number a year from now. Right now, there's not that risk.
Right.
A year from now, there's risk in that number.
We should deal with it then. I mean, remember when we went down to 7, she was saying 8 was still fine.
Right. So who knows? It changes like the weather, so you don't know. It's hard.
She
I think
was,
we're
she
in a-
told us we didn't need to lower it.
Right.
2008, 2009 scared a lot of people. So, personally, if you look at it over 20 years, you can make an argument for 8.25.
Now, also, I told her we're thinking about putting more money in which she says we're about the only town that does that extra, deals with our obligations, so that makes her easier to accept what rates are. So I think if we put money over there, I think all the towns with S, us and Southbury do it, so she likes her S-town clients. I said, good. So I said, well, we're trying to be proactive, we're trying to deal, because this is a debt obligation, that's the way I look at it, the past service costs. So we're solving a debt problem. We have fund balance that doesn't give us any benefit, doesn't give us any interest, or small interest, doesn't give us any benefit with the rating agency. And this obligation, which is a negative to the rating agency, we're lowering a negative. So I think it's a smart move to start lowering that down.
But not by a huge
Not by,
number.
we have to be cautious.
Right.
I think being cautious is prudent. And it couldn't hurt to start with $1 million. Put our toe in the water.
Right.
See how it works.
If we think we have $6 million, am I remembering right? $6 million in that account.
6.5 in that account.
And if we really don't think we need it in there, why not put more like 3 million in?
I have a memory, though. We had one year where I think we lost $1.5 million.
You can.
We can lose $1.5 million.
Well, and the aggregate.
So I'm saying keep 3 million
Yeah,
in that
right,
account, but put the other 3.5 into.
But do you want to take it all in 1 year?
So,
But if you take it in 1 year, that lowers your contribution to those.
so think about
each year.
this. I'll get you a calculation on if we put $1 million in or $2 million in, what it would be. I'll tell her to run $1 million at 7.5%. Do we feel comfortable keeping the 7.5% the consistent number?
Yes.
Yeah.
Jeff, everyone feels comfortable at 7.5%. And I'll tell her, use the 7.5, not the 7 that she just arbitrarily used, and therefore it will lower our OPEB. And in addition, do a calculation with the 7.5, and then do a calculation if we transferred another $1 million over, let's say by June 30th. What would that?
Ask her to
Ask-
do
ask
$1
her
million
to-
and $2 million,
and-
because all she's gonna, it won't take her any more time.
Okay, $1 million and $2 million.
And 3. I mean, I just don't see why we wouldn't want to maximize that, because it's
get
sitting
it.
there not earning much interest, and it could be in a place where it's doing the taxpayer some real good.
Yeah, we'll get the number that eliminates the arc.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna go to 7.5, and then we're gonna do $1 million transfer, 2 million,
Eliminates the
and 3
deficit.
million.
Yeah. That'd make me
And
happy.
then we'll see what the new OPEB number looks like. I think it'll be a lot more favorable, and both boards should be excited about it, and the taxpayers should like it too.
Yeah.
I think it's realistic that we're using our reserves prudently.
We all agree,
Good, okay. So that will be,
right?
and we'll finalize everything next meeting. We'll say, yes, we like this, and think about it. You got to seriously think about it, because it's not an easy decision. You have to look at the negatives, and that's what we should do. We should look at all sides of it. I know I've been agonizing over it for a long
So
time.
the negative I just want to bring up is, I understood that we had our aggregate limit program changed from being an aggregate in total to an aggregate at a claim level.
Yes.
And so when you have an aggregate, yeah, thank you, I'm using the wrong words. When you have a stop loss, and you don't have a stop loss for the overall program, but on an individual level, you still have more exposure. And I'm sure we save some money by eliminating that overall stop loss, but the truth is, when you don't have that, you probably need a little more conservative on what's
But it's a
aside.
numbers game. I mean,
It is.
Don't we still have the
I missed
aggregates?
The last 3 words that you said.
You might want to not get rid of the whole thing at once, because you still have a little bit of exposure, because your aggregate's gone in total.
I thought we still had the aggregate.
At one point in time you did. It was gone before I got here. Was it 2000?
We have an aggregate
We did it
for
about
claim,
4 years
not in
ago.
total.
We,
I thought it was less even.
I'm sorry?
I thought it was even more recently.
So there's a little risk.
Based on looking at the reserve levels, and I thought the Insurance Advisory Committee had kind of discussed that.
but even if we move 3 million, we're still leaving 3.5 million. That's a lot, and given that you have individual stop loss. And And while individual costs can be extraordinarily spiky, the numbers of people who incur those huge claims is much more predictable.
I agree.
Now, for this transfer, I'd like us to,
And keep in mind, this is not a transfer, but go ahead.
run by, to make sure we're not over exceeding our bounds. Town council?
As of right now, you are 100, yes, we are 100%.
Stay within our bounds, so town council, the auditors are on board.
The auditors have not spoken with town council yet.
Spoke
Was
to
it a
town council, the
reallocation?
auditors, and also talk to our insurance advisor as to the concern on, with the new type of risk that we have, if we go to a $3 million reserve, is that adequate?
So just to touch on Jeff's topic, this is not a supplemental appropriation. This money has already been appropriated through the raising of taxes. It's essentially the difference between the amount that's been paid into the fund and the amount of claims that have been paid out. So this is not a transfer, this is simply me wiring the money and doing a very quick journal entry.
It's a reallocation within the fiduciary account.
Absolutely. Yep.
And is there something that you mentioned before about having to do something to sort of, not reimburse, but pay forward to the employees who,
Not on this one.
Not on this one,
If you
okay.
pay it into OPEB, I mean, they're going to benefit in it when they retire.
Linda, what I think you're talking about is we were talking about over on the health, on the service fund, not making the June payment.
right.
So we'd save about a
Okay,
million.
I'm conflating them,
you know.
sorry.
And that one, we'd have to talk, but
Yeah.
the employees could benefit, or unless you don't want them.
No, it's only fair to them.
Well, I think we've been fair to the employees, and I had to stress this with the Board of Selectmen as well. The employees are charged a market competitive rate. If they pay a percentage based on what's been negotiated with them. And, what I try and explain to some of the ones that talk about the favorable balances is, if it went the other way, we wouldn't be coming after you for more
Yeah, the
funds.
town bears all the risk.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Now,
fair point.
one thing, we need the Board of Selectmen on the authorization for the energy saving project.
Yes, you do.
So how do we do
Oh,
that?
that's right.
Yes and no,
Okay,
because everything is, go ahead, teed up to be assuming that we're going there for the debt permission, and because it's the on-bill financing, and that would be following the model that they previously voted on for the wastewater. But if you're saying we're paying for it up front,
Right.
we don't have to go through
We
those.
take it out of
hoops,
reserves, we don't
because
have to do
If
that.
it's truly just
but
paying.
they have to authorize
Yeah.
2 out of reserves.
On that one, on
They
the
have to sign
reserves,
off.
okay, yes, they do.
They
They have
meet-
to.
Okay.
They
Just-
need to
it
recommend
just
it to
changes
us,
It
right?
changes what's
Right.
been drafted and is gonna be reviewed by
So
council.
when is their next meeting? How do we communicate that with them?
24th.
Their next meeting is the 24th. So our next meeting, we can say we recommend that they do this and that they have to entertain it.
You can if you guys want me to put a transfer request on there, I
Yes,
absolutely.
put a transfer request.
Can we
on.
approve it, at the next meeting, subject to their
Yes,
Yeah. So
approval?
we'll approve it subject to their approval and then
and
let
it
them.
actually looks good, because the way they'll write the memo based on your meeting to the Board of Selectmen, so you guys are taking the proactive approach of reducing expenses for the town, and now it's in their lap to just say yes.
Okay, so any other action here? Everyone's straight on what we're doing here?
Yes.
Now, as far as other business, anyone have any other business?
Well,
Nothing else?
I would like us, once we get beyond the referendum, in other words, in June, July, perhaps we start having a similar conversation about the water pollution control fund. Because there's a sizable reserve out there that I think we need to take another look at and understand, what it's could potentially be used for.
Can you sweep money from that fund, though? Isn't that a dedicated
Well-
fund?
Dedicated for the
Only
use,
if I
people.
can
It has to be used for sewer
Yeah.
only.
But Linda, the objective here would be to try and initiate some changes in the sewer use fees and
Right.
the hookup charges and
Yeah.
all of those things that are potentially things that cause businesses not to come here.
Oh, absolutely, I agree, yeah. I thought you meant you were sweeping it
No.
into some other fund.
I think what we ought to do is get
Yeah,
that board in front of us,
yeah.
get a list of items and start the conversation and say, here's our concern.
Do that.
And then what are we gonna do about it? What's the long-range plan?
Yeah.
You know, we had them before us a couple of years ago. I think it's prudent to bring them before us
And what
again.
they said at that point was they had huge capital that was just down the road, and they had to keep the reserve for that.
Right.
But the problem is the reserve hasn't gone down. So the huge capital hasn't
Yeah, it's
happened
Still
yet.
2 or 3 years out.
Right.
I forget, it's some connection probably.
We have to understand that capital needs, and I think that that'd be a good
Yeah.
conversation to have, because the sewer kind of gets pushed aside, and some of us, it does impact our rates, because 40% of the town are users, and I happen to be one of them, but I would like to have that conversation about the rate.
Sure.
I apologize
I
in
think-
advance. What is the rate that you guys are paying?
$335 a month,
That's
a year.
A
fantastic.
year.
That is absolutely
I know,
fantastic.
we used to pay less, but things,
Yeah, it used to be
Tom used
$325.
to be a penny.
Is that
But,
325?
$335 a year is what the current,
Not $3.35. I'm not on it,
300
so I have no idea.
$335,
that's the
yes.
current residential
Wow.
rate.
But I think so we should get them in there, but not till after the budget cycle, then we'll get them in there to talk about
That's what I'm
long-term.
talking- that's what I'm talking
good.
about.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, I think it's good for the town to the extent that if there's a huge reserve in there, that they're investing in that, if they're expanding to other homes, I mean, it increases property values because it's a cost you've got to factor in. If you have to redo you're not on city sewer, right, Linda? You got to redo your fields there. That's like a
Well,
$15,000-$20,000 cost.
But I think it's a long-term planning
Don't
thing,
have
that
to
they
do
should
that.
be part of working with us on long-range planning. That's a side product of long-range planning, what they're doing. You know, there's a lot of sideways long-range planning can go, and I think that's a proper one to expand and make, it's a worthwhile project to spend some time and get them
Yeah.
part of the equation and keep us up to speed what's going on and get a reasonable plan.
And that's whenever we
in-
sell to other towns, right? I mean, we
Right.
provide is it Granby or?
Granby and Avon, have Avon.
Granby and Avon use our facility, but the.
They pay for it.
They pay for it,
Yeah.
absolutely, but it's an area where maybe we
Partially.
can.
One other thing, well, I remember, are we doing the budget right
Part
this
of it.
time
They don't
on that
send-
debt payment?
They don't send
we are.
everything.
Because the last few years, we didn't quite get the budget right, because we kind of netted it, not grossed it up.
Yes, revenue and expenditures match now.
So we have to gross up because our gross payment and then what we get reimbursed, so that kind of didn't get done right, and so we had some awkward moments for the last 2 years, so now hopefully we'll get it right.
I mean, with our neighboring towns?
No, with our, the
No.
way we budgeted.
Oh,
We
yes.
can't, we
You
had
just had
to,
a debt service number that you never really planned for.
Yeah.
You also had revenue for the exact same amount that you never planned for.
Oh.
Just causes a problem for accountants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand.
We had to
All
gross
right,
up.
any other business for us?
No, take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.